I was camping alone with my dog, Duke. As night fell, Duke's growling and barking made me feel uneasy. Though I tried to ignore it and get some rest, in the middle of the night, Duke's barking became so frantic it woke me up. I grabbed my flashlight and peered outside, but I couldn't see anything. The next day I decided to go for a hike with Duke, but he wouldn't leave my side. As dusk began to set, I heard a strange noise that sounded like a mix between an animal and a human. Duke started barking and I saw a figure emerging from the trees. It was a Skinwalker. Duke and I ran back to our campsite, and I could feel the Skinwalker getting closer. Just as I thought we were done for, the Skinwalker lunged towards me, but Duke jumped in front of me and bit the Skinwalker. It let out a blood-curdling scream and disappeared. But something was off. Duke was acting strange, almost as if he was possessed. I did some research and found out that Skinwalkers could possess animals, and the only way to save them was to kill the Skinwalker. I knew what I had to do, but I never thought I would have to kill a Skinwalker to save my dog. I grabbed my shotgun and set out to find the Skinwalker. I wandered deep into the woods, following Duke's growling until I spotted the Skinwalker lurking in the shadows. It looked like a monster, with glowing red eyes and twisted limbs. Without hesitation, I raised my shotgun and fired, hitting the Skinwalker square in the chest. It let out a deafening howl and charged towards me, but I managed to reload and fire a second shot, blowing its head off. As the creature fell to the ground, Duke's eyes returned to their normal bright brown color. He nuzzled my leg and I knew he was grateful. But something about the whole experience had left me feeling uneasy. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had just killed something that was once human. As I walked back to camp with Duke by my side, I couldn't help but wonder if there were more creatures like the Skinwalker out there, lurking in the shadows. I realized that, while I may have saved Duke, I had opened my eyes to a world that was much darker and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I remember the day my friends and I decided to go camping in the remote woods of Darkwood Forest. It seemed like a great idea at first, but we had no idea what was waiting for us out there. We set up our tents, started a fire, and had a good time, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. But as night fell, things started to get weird. We heard strange noises in the distance, and the wind picked up, making the trees sway eerily. We all felt uneasy, but we shrugged it off as just our imagination. That's when we saw them. In the distance, we saw a group of people in black robes, holding torches and chanting. We froze, unsure of what to do. But as they got closer, we saw the fear in their eyes, and knew that we had to run. As we ran, we stumbled upon a clearing, and saw the cult carrying out a sacrifice. They had a young girl tied up on an altar, and their leader was holding a knife, ready to plunge it into her heart. We gasped in horror, but knew we couldn't stop to help her. We had to save ourselves. We grabbed our things and bolted through the woods, hoping to escape. We could hear their footsteps getting closer, and we knew that they were coming after us. We ran faster, our hearts pounding in our chests, but we could feel their presence behind us. We didn't know where to go, and the darkness was our only refuge. Finally, we stumbled upon a clearing, and we could see our car in the distance. We ran towards it as fast as we could, but we knew that the cult was still behind us. We made it to the car, and as we sped away, we could see the cult disappearing into the darkness. We were shaken, scared, and grateful to be alive. We vowed never to go camping in Darkwood Forest again, and we never did. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I can never forget the image of that poor girl being sacrificed to the cult's twisted beliefs. I remember the camping trip vividly, even though it happened many years ago. I was just a child, full of wonder and excitement about sleeping under the stars. But little did I know, that trip would turn out to be a nightmare. It was the second night of our camping trip, and my family and I were sitting around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. As the night grew darker, My parents decided it was time for my little brother and me to go to bed. We climbed into our tent, nestled in our sleeping bags, and soon fell asleep. But something woke me up in the middle of the night. I could hear a strange rustling sound outside our tent. At first I thought it was just an animal, but then I heard footsteps approaching closer and closer. My heart was racing as I peered out of the tent's opening. That's when I saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching us. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing and wearing a hat that obscured his face. I tried to scream for my parents, but fear gripped my throat, and no sound came out. The man beckoned me to come closer, his voice a low whisper. I knew I had to get out of there, but my little brother was sound asleep, and I didn't want to leave him behind. So I mustered all my courage and slowly unzipped the tent's entrance, ready to bolt if necessary. But the man was gone. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought it was just a bad dream, and that I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I had seen and heard. That night, I didn't sleep a wink, terrified that the man would come back. But he didn't. And as we packed up our campsite and headed back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. To this day, I still wonder who that man was and what he wanted. And I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine whenever I think about that camping trip and how close I came to being lured into the woods by a stranger. Excited for a break from everyday life, my friends and I went camping in the rainforest. As we sat by the fire, we told each other scary stories. But little did I know, a real-life horror story was about to unfold. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. A tall, thin figure was lurking in the shadows. They were human, but something about them was off. Their movements were jerky and unnatural. The figure appeared more frequently, watching us from the shadows. They vanished whenever we tried to approach them. One night, after drinking, I woke up at early dawn to go to the bathroom. When I heard a branch snap, thinking it was one of my friends, I glanced. I was wrong. Had I not have already been peeing, I would have pissed my pants. Suddenly, the man began to sprint at me, chasing me through the forest, his laughter echoing. We left immediately after I returned. I couldn't help but wonder, who or what was that figure, and why were they tormenting us? It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, a chance to unplug and disconnect from the chaos of everyday life. But it turned into a nightmare I can never forget. As I set up my tent and started a fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made me jump. I tried to reassure myself that it was just my imagination, but the feeling only grew stronger as the night wore on. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I heard strange noises outside my tent. It sounded like something was scratching at the fabric, trying to get in. I clutched my flashlight tightly and tried to ignore it, but the scratching continued. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the scratching stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief and closed my eyes, thinking that I could finally get some rest. But then I heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, getting closer and closer to my tent. I was paralyzed with fear as the footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing, slow and steady, as if someone was standing just inches away from me. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. Suddenly, the zipper of my tent was pulled open, and a figure loomed over me. It was a man, his face obscured by the darkness. He reached down and grabbed me by the throat, choking me until I could barely breathe. Just when I thought I was going to die, the man released his grip and vanished into the night. I lay there, gasping for air, not daring to move until the sun rose. As I emerged from my tent, I saw a note pinned to the tree next to me. It read, "April Fools." It was then that I realized my friends had played a cruel joke on me, staging the entire ordeal to scare me. I was relieved and angry all at once, but I couldn't deny the rush of adrenaline that had kept me up all night. Though it was a terrifying experience, it was also one I would never forget. I was excited for a fun camping trip with my friends, but it quickly turned into a nightmare. We set up our tents deep in the woods, surrounded by darkness and the sounds of nature. As night fell, I noticed a figure watching us from the shadows. It was a man, dressed in ragged clothes, with wild hair and a manic look in his eyes. At first I tried to ignore him, thinking he was just a harmless vagrant passing through. But as the night wore on, I realized that he was getting closer and closer, stalking us through the trees. The man began to taunt us, making strange noises and throwing rocks at our tents. We tried to scare him off, but he was too persistent. He seemed to be enjoying our fear. As the hours passed, the man's behavior became more and more erratic. He started yelling and screaming, waving a knife around in the air. My friends and I knew we had to do something before he hurt us. We made a plan to sneak away while the man was distracted, but he was always one step ahead. He seemed to know exactly where we were at all times. In a desperate attempt to escape, we ran deeper into the woods, hoping to lose the man in the darkness. But he was relentless, chasing us down and cornering us by a cliff. It was then that I realized we were in grave danger. We were trapped, with no way out. The man lunged at us with his knife, and my friends and I fought back with all our might. It was a brutal struggle, but we managed to overpower him and escape. Shaken and terrified, we made our way back to civilization, vowing never to return to those woods again. Hopefully my experience doesn't shy you away from camping. It was supposed to be a fun-filled camping trip with my friends, but it turned into a nightmare. We had just walked back from the carnival, laughing and joking about the clowns we had seen. Little did I know that the very same clown would be the one to haunt me that night. As we set up our tents and settled down for the night, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching us. It was an eerie feeling, but I tried to ignore it and focus on getting some rest. But that's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps getting closer and closer to our campsite. I woke up my friends, and we peered out of our tents, trying to see what was making the noise. And that's when we saw him, the clown from the carnival, with his painted face and sinister smile standing just a few feet away from us. We froze in fear, not knowing what to do. But then he started running towards us, waving his arms and making strange noises. We knew we had to get out of there, and fast. We grabbed our things and ran as fast as we could, deeper into the woods. But the clown was right behind us, and he was gaining on us. As we ran, we could hear his laughter echoing through the woods, sending chills down our spines. It was as if he was toying with us, enjoying the fear he was causing us. We stumbled and fell, but we didn't stop running. We couldn't let the clown catch us. Finally, we saw the lights of a nearby cabin, and we ran towards it, hoping that someone would be there to help us. We banged on the door, screaming for help, and thankfully, someone answered. We told them what had happened, and they called the police. When the police arrived, they searched the woods, but they couldn't find the clown. But I knew he was still out there, somewhere, waiting for his next victim. I'll never forget that night, and I'll never be able to look at a clown the same way again. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years since that terrifying night in the woods. I was a reckless teenager who loved nothing more than pushing the limits, and that night I decided to sneak out and go camping in the woods with some of my friends. We snuck out of our homes quietly, trying not to make any noise that would alert our parents. We packed our backpacks with food, drinks, and a tent, and headed out into the dark, eerie woods. At first, everything was fun and exciting. We told ghost stories around the campfire and laughed and joked around. But as the night grew darker and the woods became quieter, an uneasy feeling started to creep up on me. That's when we heard it. a blood-curdling scream coming from deep in the woods. We all froze, too scared to move. And then we heard it again, closer this time. We quickly packed up our things and tried to leave, but it was too late. Suddenly a man appeared out of nowhere, yelling at us to get out of his property. We didn't know what he was talking about, but he was clearly angry and aggressive. We tried to explain that we were just camping, but he wouldn't listen. He chased us through the woods, his angry voice echoing around us. We ran as fast as we could, our hearts pounding in our chests. We didn't know where we were going. We just knew we had to get away. Eventually, we stumbled upon a road and were able to find our way back to civilization. We never spoke about that night again, but it left a lasting impact on me. I learned that sometimes, pushing the limits can have scary and dangerous consequences.